Good day to the telephone webcast, SAE Standards for Counterfeit Mitigation in Electronics, which is right for you. I am Meinhardt, Manager E-Learning for SAE Professional Development, and your host and moderator for the next 60 minutes. This e-learning event today features our speaker, Ann Poncheri. Hello there, Ann. Ann?
I'm sorry. Good morning, Sam. Good morning, everybody.
Hi there. Ann is currently a consultant for test methods of counterfeit electronic parts for the global electronics industry and implementation of the quality management standards ISO IEC 17025 and ISO 9001. Previously, Ms. Poncheri was the president, CEO for Silicon Cert Laboratories in Reading, PA, and with over 20 years of experience in quality management systems, she's held various management positions in quality and engineering in the telecommunications, automotive, plastics, and chemicals industry. Ms. Poncheri is a member of the SAE Aerospace G19 Counterfeit Electronic Components Committee that's chartered to address aspects of preventing, detecting, responding to, and counteracting the threat of counterfeit electronic components. She's also actively involved in the development of AS6171 authentication testing for electronic parts, testing services, as well as the subcommittees. And before I turn things over to you, Ann, I'd like to run through the objectives of today's professional development telephone cast. The objectives of today's program are for you to appreciate the impact of counterfeit electronic components in the supply chain, distinguish the differences between the SAE standards, determine the applicability of the standards within the purchasing process, also to integrate the appropriate counterfeit mitigation standard into your quality management system, and finally, implement the flow-down counterfeit mitigation requirements to your suppliers. Just a quick mention that this program is protected under U.S. copyright. No portion of the event may be taped, stored, or reproduced in any form. SAE is recording the event, including your questions and comments. We'll be making that recording available on our website, and I'll provide more detail on that recording toward the end of the program and also through a follow-up email. Speaking of questions and comments, you'll be provided an opportunity to talk with Ann between the presentation of each of the standards. We'll also reserve some time at the end of her presentation, and when we get to those points in our program, I'll provide you with instructions on how to get into queue. So before we get into Ann's formal presentation, let's get a little insight from our participants. Ann, may I ask you to read our first polling question and the answer options for us?
All right. Thank you, Sam, for the introduction. Our first polling question is, what is your organization's level of implementation of a counterfeit mitigation program for electronic components? The choices are A, we have no program in place, B, just beginning to define our program, C, we have a documented program, D, we have documented and implemented our counterfeit mitigation program, E, we have documented and implemented program and have flowed the requirements down to our suppliers. F, our organization will not need to develop a counterfeit mitigation program because we do not directly handle electronic components.
Okay, and we're going to be launching that poll for you in just a moment, but we'll have a second question on there for you to respond to. Ann, and that second question is? Has
the company experienced an issue directly related to a counterfeit electronic component? A, no. B, yes, but it was found within our organization and had minimal impact on the minimal impact on our organization. C, yes, but it was found after manufacture and had a large impact on our organization. And D, yes, it was found after it was released into the field and had a significant impact on our organization.
Okay, so everyone should see that polling question mechanism that popped up on the screen, and we'd like you to respond to both of those questions. And how you do that is to choose the radio button next to your answer choice and hit the submit button in the lower right corner of that polling window. And do you find most issues directly related to counterfeit electronic components have minimal, large, or significant impact on organizations, or is it kind of all over the board?
It's really all over the board, and the reason I ask that question is it's very critical to the impact to the organization is significant depending upon whether or not discover the counterfeit while it's still in your facility and before it's released, or whether it's been released into a component. Worst case scenario, it's already been installed into a weapon system and it has to be recalled. So it's really the whole goal of all of these standards is to try to help a company develop the counterfeit mitigation program so that it is always found within your company and it has minimal impact on your organization.
Okay. We've closed the poll in the interest of time, and we're tabulating the results right now. We'll those pop up on the screen momentarily. We have about 100-plus people on the line today, so it takes a moment. Here we go. And it looks like we have a fairly even split in the answer choices for question 1. Although answer E,
ideally, yeah, it's about 20% of the people on the line. I'm going to. Okay, so 20% of the people on the line have a documented program in place and have floated down. So that's the optimal place you would want to be. Mm-hmm. So it's good that most of the most folks at least started on something or have some program in place.
For the second question,
which is I expected a smaller amount, 8% goal was found to have an impact on the company, and 22% said that within their facility, which is the goal, and then 22% of the folks attending didn't have any experience with a counterfeit component.
Okay. Well, hopefully they'll learn a lot today and know how to prevent things from happening. And with that, Ann, we're going to close out this poll. And by the way, you can close out that polling window on your own screen by clicking the X in the right corner of the polling window. And Ann, we'll pass the ball to you and let you get underway.
Okay. All right. As most of you are aware, there's been 3 issued standards that SAE has issued for counterfeit mitigation, and 1 that's in development and to be issued within the next, hopefully, 6 months. I'm going to cover those standards in detail today. I've decided to do it in 3 different sections, and as Sam said, there'll be opportunity for people to ask questions in between each of the sections. First, I want to start with talking about where the standards came from. SAE started the G19 committee in 2007, and it chartered to address aspects of preventing, detecting, responding to, and countering the threat of counterfeit electronic components. So this committee was chartered with developing some standards for the industry to use. Now, the participants include government, some defense and aerospace manufacturers, industry groups, as well as testing labs. Now, the committee has since evolved into 5 subcommittees, and I want to put the slide up mainly to emphasize the number of people that are working on this. The committees are usually focused on 1 standard each, so because that way they have a limited scope. First is the Continuous Improvement Committee, which is working on AS 5553. The committee is the G19D Distributor Committee, and that committee is working on AS 6081, which is for distributors. The G19DR is a Distributor Risk Characterization Subcommittee, which they were responsible for issuing ARP 6178. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, an ARP is an aerospace recommended practice. So a standard, but it's a recommended practice. The A committee is working on AS 6171, which is the test labs standard for the test methods. The G19C committee is working on the standard compliance verification documents. So it would be companion documents for certification bodies to use when they're performing audits. So I mentioned you've got a significant amount of participation on this committee. I looked at some of the numbers, and you've got about 20 military Department of Defense agencies. You've got a number of distributors. You've got OCMs and OEMs, a significant number of those as well. So it's a good cross-section of the industry. And just a note, members do function as individuals, not as members of their respective companies. So this slide, I realize it's a little bit busy, but I wanted to present it because it does a really good summary of the documents that are being developed by G19 committee, as well as who the target audience is. So look at across the top, the section I'm going to start with. I'm going to start here along this line with the distributor, the user, and the test provider. I'm going to start in the center. The user would be considered any company who takes electronic components and either assembles them, manufactures them, or does some kind of repair with them. The distributors would be anyone who buys and sells components. There's no value added that they're doing other than they're purchasing the components and they're selling them when there's a need. And then the test provider, they're the ones that would be performing the tests for counterfeit mitigation. So if I start in the center in the first document, AS 5553, which was the first one that was developed, the target audience is the user. So it's for people who take electronic components and manufacture, put into systems, or do repairs with them. The document directly below it, which is not issued yet, it's still it's validated soon, is the AS 5553 compliance standard that would go with the AS 5553. And what that is it's an audit checklist. If you're familiar, a lot of the aerospace standards have companion documents, which are the checklists that go with the standard. And the goal of the checklist is to make it so it's more consistent for the auditors are more consistent. When the registrars and the assessment bodies come in and look at you, they're using that checklist so that there's more consistency on the audit process. The next document, ARP 6178, notice that one up to both the distributor and the user. This is a tool for risk assessment of distributors. It's an Excel spreadsheet. I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's customizable in that you can determine which questions you think are more important, and it gives an actual numeric rating to the distributors. So it's here under both the distributor and the user because it can be used by the user to a tool to assess their distributors and to actually assign a number and compare one distributor against the other, and it can be used by the distributors as self-assessment tool. So the standard AS 6081, this standard is a counterfeit electronic parts avoidance for distributors. The target audience is distributors. It is intended for certification. There's also a compliance document that's being worked on right now that hasn't been issued, but again, it's similar to the other compliance documents. It will be a checklist. It will include all of the requirements in the AS 6081. Moving over here to the test provider, the document is called is AS 6171, Test Method Standards for Counterfeit Electronic Parts. This document has not yet been issued. It's still in draft. And this document will include all of the test methods for the test, for who's ever providing the testing. Notice that we've got arrows leading back over to 6081, and we've got an arrow leading over to 5553. That's because those documents, the test methods will be referred to from those documents. Once it's issued, the other documents will refer to AS 6171. So moving on to the next slide. Now first I'm going to talk about AS 5553. The title of the document is Counterfeit Electronic Parts Avoidance, Detection, Mitigation, and Disposition. The audience is original equipment manufacturers and users, integrators that purchase and/or manufacture products with electrical components. So the purpose of it is to provide uniform requirements, practices, and methods to mitigate the risks of purchasing and supplying counterfeit electronic parts. The uses are, it can be used to develop a counterfeit control plan. So if a company is interested in looking for a good model on how to, what you should include in your policy documents and control plan, you can utilize it that way. It has excellent guidelines in the appendices for counterfeit mitigation. And it can be used for certification through recognized certification bodies. Status of this, it was initially issued in 2009 and very quickly adopted by NASA and the Department of Defense. And Vision A was issued in January of 2013. I pulled one figure from the standard itself because this gives a really good summary of the application of who this standard applies to. So as I had said, it applies to anyone who's taking in components and doing type of value add and sending it out, and that it'll eventually end up in a component or in a system in the field. So you've got everyone from OEM levels to the systems who are doing the boards, to organizations that if you're subcontracting your purchasing function out, this would be a good tool for them to put a program in, and to any repair organizations as well. So it's a pretty broad standard and applies to a lot of different types of organizations. Listed the table of contents. It's the requirements are that the first requirement, and I'm going to cover just a few of the requirements of each of these standards. It wouldn't be possible for me to cover the entire document, obviously, because if you saw earlier, there's the courses that are offered are 2 courses that would cover just AS 5553. So I'm just going to barely scratch the surface on some of the requirements. And I selected a few that I think are fairly important that are some of the key pieces to this. First, the most important aspect of 5553 is the development of a control plan to ensure you do not get counterfeit parts in your supply chain. And it includes that you must develop a control plan with all of these different items in place. And I'll cover these in the slides. So first, the requirement here is that the organization shall develop, and this is verbatim from the standard, shall then implement a fraudulent counterfeit EEE parts control plan that documents its processes used for risk mitigation, disposition, and reporting of suspect or confirmed fraudulent counterfeit EEE parts. The control plan shall include the processes described in 4.1.1 and 4.1.10. So we'll talk a little bit about control plan, because some of the people who are manufacturing are familiar with this term. And some of you who are not in manufacturing may not have heard it, but a control plan basically is a written summary description of the steps needed to ensure that counterfeit parts do not enter the supply chain. It's going to describe the personnel, the actions required to make sure that you don't get counterfeit parts. One of the key things about a control plan is it's a living document. It should change and evolve because your customer requirements will change, the industry standards will change, and the counterfeiters are getting better, and the detection methods are getting better. So with all of that in mind, it should be something that's regularly reviewed and updated. Describe the steps that you'll take if you find a counterfeit part, especially containment reporting and how you communicate with your customer. Given the fact that you have to develop a control plan that covers everything, as I said, from 4.1.1 to 4.1.10, I want to look at the list of what all is included. You're going to have to develop a personnel training plan. You have to have policies about availability of parts and your preference to use the approved authorized supply chains, I should call them. You have to define your purchasing process. And I can't go through all of these, but you've obviously got material control and have to have consistent reporting. So just a quick list of some of the requirements. I've already talked about personnel training. The purchasing process, you must specify a preference for purchasing directly from the OCM, the original component manufacturer, or the authorized suppliers. Traceability, you want to have the name and location of all of the supply chain intermediaries. So any who had it at what point in time. Disclose writing at each time of each quote whether or not the source of supply is authorized. And the verify purchase return parts, which is basically your incoming inspection, you have to have some kind of process in place that says this is how much testing I will do depending upon the product risk. Now, one thing that's interesting about AS 5553 is it's an over 40-page document, and only 3 of those pages are the actual requirements, and about I think it's 25 of them are in the appendices. And it'd be, if I didn't talk about the appendices, even though there are no requirements in them. If you're familiar with these types of standards, they tell you what the requirements are, but they don't tell you how to do them. but the appendices have a lot of really good best practices on how to do it. So a good example is, for example, the procurement Appendix D, which has procurement contract examples. In the appendix, it has a lot of the verbiage that you could use, put directly into your purchase order to state, this is what I'm going to do if I have a counterfeit part. Because one of the things that's a big concern is we want to get these confirmed counterfeit parts out of the supply chain, and you don't want to return them back to the got them from, because there's a good chance they're just going to turn around and sell it to somebody else. So what language do you want to put into your into your order to ensure that that you've protected yourself to say, I don't want to pay for these, and I also don't want to return them. So, you have to have some discussion about what you're going to do with the parts. So the other one really worth mentioning is reporting. It has some good recommendations for reporting, how you may want to document your policy regarding what do you do when you have a counterfeit part. How do you communicate back to that customer? If it's from a particular source, do you go back and look at everything from that source and assume that you now have to do diligence to see, whether or not there's a problem with that? So that concludes my discussion of AS 5553. So now I'd like to open it up and see if there are any questions.
So to let people know how they can get into queue to ask you a question, at the top of your screen, there's a tab you can roll over to reveal some of the Training Center options. Click the icon called Participants, and on that panel, just below the list of names, is an icon that looks like an open hand. That's called the Raise Hand button. You click on Raise Hand, and it will us that you have a question, and we'll unmute your phone line and call on you when it's your turn to speak. And if we run out of time, we will invite you to enter that question into the Q&A box, and we'll attempt to get to it a little bit later. If you're joining us by voice over IP and you don't have a microphone, you're welcome to enter your question into the Q&A box. It's also accessible on that tool panel. We'll attempt to get to it. I'll read it on your behalf, and again, if we run out of time, we'll revisit those at the end of the program. So I'm going to kick things off. Are there any companies that are AS 5553 certified?
That's a good question. No, there are not at this point in time. In the United States, ANAB is the body. They have recently issued their accreditation rules. So at this point in time, the certification bodies can now apply into ANAB to have the authority to go out and grant the certifications. There are some folks that have gone through the process internally and say they're compliant to AS 5553, but there are no officially certified organizations at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go ahead and go to the phone lines then. I see Bart has his hand raised. Bart, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Sam and Ann. Ann, you made a comment about controlling product incoming inspection criteria. Based on component risk, I think that goes to the type of device. Are there some good criteria or guidance on what types of components are greater risk than others and should involve greater scrutiny to evaluate the integrity of the parts?
That's a really good question. There are a lot of databases out there that are available that retain the data on the parts themselves, that you can go in and look and see whether or not there have been previous findings on those parts or previous incidences of counterfeit. As far as I know, by part type, I don't know of anybody that's issued something for open, for other people to use. I know some companies are pulling together their own lists saying that based on if it's this type of part, it had this level of, I would say, probability of being counterfeit, whereas other parts are very rarely counterfeited. So I haven't, the data is available on individual parts, but as far as part family, I haven't really seen anything on that that's been published.
All right, I'll have you click on that raise hand button again to lower your hand, and we'll move on now to Aaron. Aaron, go ahead. Your phone line's open.
Thank you. The question now relates to AS 5553 and the idea of training. Now, it says you must have some sort of training program in place, and I'm just wondering, I had an opportunity to go through all of the elements of that document, but is there a recommended training program? What's considered, the appropriate level of training, I guess, to detect and avoid counterfeit components? I guess that's my question.
Okay, and then that's another good question. You have to, and it's really looking at you individually, your company, and if there's no, if you requirement, it basically says you must have a training program in place for counterfeit mitigation. How you implement that is really up to you, and what sources you use is up to you. You can do it internally or you can do it externally. The appendices does have some recommendations for some external training that you can go to, including some of these SAE standards courses. But so if you've developed the internal processes yourself, you can do the training program just by training your internal processes that you have in place. Okay. The requirement is you have to define the training and deliver it. Whether you do it in-house or whether you use external is up to you.
Okay, thank you.
And the training course that SAE offers, details are available at counterfeitparts.sae.org under the training session, so you might want to take a peek at that. Let's move on to one of the questions in our Q&A box. It looks like Gwen is asking, what are the main differences between 5553 and 5553A?
The content of it, the main requirements stay the same. The reason it was changed is because its initial issue was centric around United States, and it referenced lots, not only the terminology, but some of the reporting agencies and things like that were directly referenced in that standard. And the revision was to make it more international friendly. So instead of saying, reporting to, FBI, it said to report to authorities having jurisdiction. So the biggest change was to try to make it more internationally friendly. But for the most part, there wasn't a significant amount of changes to the content of requirements.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question and then we'll need to move on. Let's open up the phone line from Jerry. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, and Ann, thank you for the overview. There was a comment made about the standard was adopted by the DoD. What does that mean, especially in terms of contract relationships, FARs and requirements will go down?
This is a very, very good question. The DFARS right now, they adopted AS 5553 fairly quickly in 2009. But right now there's been, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but the DFARS and the FARs have been rewritten to include some language around counterfeit electronic parts and mitigation programs and things like that. So I can't speak, I'm aware of them, but I'm not know as much as a lot of people who deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Your best bet is to take a look at, I know there's the DFAR has been written and put out for comment, where it's directly addressing in what they mean by what you must have in place for counterfeit mitigation programs. Welcome.
So with that, Ann, I think we'll go ahead and your next segment. If we've left any questions unanswered, we can take a look at those toward the end of the program. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay. All right. I'm going to talk about AS 6081. Standard is called Fraudulent Counterfeit Electronic Parts Avoidance Detection, Mitigation, and Disposition for Distributors. The target audience is distributors of electronic components. And the purpose of this document is to standardize practices to procure parts from reliable sources, to assess and mitigate the risks of distributing counterfeit parts, to control suspect and confirmed counterfeit parts, to report suspect and confirmed counterfeit parts to other potential users and authorities having jurisdiction, and then to assess, mitigate, control, and report parts which have been used, refurbished, or reclaimed but represented as new product. So the possible uses of the standard are the requirements of a counter mitigation program. So a distributor could use this for an internal assessment. Is intended to be used for certification of distributors through recognized certification bodies. The document was issued in December of 2012, and the G19D committee is working on revision A. Now, as I said, the possible applications, third-party certification bodies. At this point, under the same point as the AS 5553 is. The ANAB has just issued their, or is in the process of issuing their accreditation rules. Once those are issued, then the certification bodies can apply to ANAB to have the authority to grant certification to AS 6081. I've seen a lot of testing, a lot of POs that are coming out now where the testing requirements in AS 6081 are being specified. So you can, some people are using this standard as a good call out of these are the test methods I would like you to perform. And OEMs can specify their suppliers comply with AS 6081 to meet the selected flow down requirements of 5553. So organization is going to be certified to 5553. One of the requirements for that standard is that you flow down the requirements through your supply chain. And the way that an organization could do that is to state that if other distributors would have to be AS 6081. Since we haven't seen any certification of 5553 yet, we haven't really seen the flow down yet occur. This is the table of contents of the document. The Section 4.1 requires that you have accountability mitigation policy. Section 4.2 requires the control plan, and it must include all of these items. Remember, from 5553, these should look fairly similar. The only additional one that's not included in 5553 is an internal audit. We must have an internal audit of your counterfeit mitigation program. Let's get a little bit more detail on that. So again, I can't cover all of the requirements, but I'm just going to cover a few. The first is that you have to you must have a quality management system acceptable to the customer. So that means is this is a good time for me to point out that AS 6081 and AS 5550 are not quality management systems. So they're not going to cover all the key pieces of your quality management system. They're intended to be used to support quality management system and only really deal with the counterfeit mitigation program. So the requirement of 6081 is that you must be certified to a quality management system, which would be AS 9120, ISO 9001 would be the applicable ones. Whichever one your customer is requesting that you be certified to. 4.1.1 states that you have to have a counterparts mitigation policy, so you have to define and document your policy to prevent the purchase, acceptance, and distribution of fraudulent parts. So you've got counterfeit parts. You need to that policy, and you also need to handle how you disposition and report the parts when you do find them. So the requirement is that you have, for the control plan, it's just very similar. You have to develop and implement a control plan that documents what processes you put in place to make sure that you don't get counterfeit parts. And your control plan has to specify flow down of the requirements to your suppliers and to their subcontractors. So if AS 6081, you need to define what requirements you want to put onto the distributors that supply into you to make sure that you don't get counterfeit parts. And it may be applied to all purchases or returns of electronic parts. This statement is acknowledging that sometimes the counterfeit parts come in through the return process, that we tend to not have as robust of a process when we're taking in a return as we do if we're making a purchase. Sometimes we just assume that what they say is in the box and it goes on the shelf. So you have to also do inspection whenever the parts are returned. So going back to Section 4.2, which has the control plan, this is going very similar, that you must have a control plan that covers all these different aspects. And although they're in a different order, for the part, it's basically the same content. You have something around your review process, You have to have a supplier approval process in place. What you put on your purchase order, there's requirements that must be on the purchase order. How you handle your product once it gets in the building, material control of the parts, and the control of non-conforming parts as well. That the only difference, this one that's not in 5553, is the requirement that you do an internal audit of your parts control plan. I'm going to cover a couple of the requirements of 681. First one is that for Section 4.2.1, Customer-Related Contract Review Agreement and Execution. You have to have a policy that says this is that specifies how you review to the PO, execution of contract requirements. The second bullet item here is that the organization, and in this case the organization is the distributor, shall disclose in writing at the time of each individual quotation the source of supply by company name and location, if the organization is or is not authorized for the items being quoted, and is or is not providing a full manufacturer's warranty on the items being on the quoted material. So this is a requirement. So at the time of quotation, you must inform your customer it from and the location, the name of the company, and the location of where you purchased the parts. Just to give you a little bit of insight, the reason that's in there is because there's a company who's purchasing the parts from the distributor needs to be able to do a risk mitigation. And for that risk mitigation is looking at the source of the parts and where it came from. So they're trying to get as much information about the components as they can when they're making a decision to purchase them. You maintain a list of approved suppliers. Most of you, if you have any other quality management system in place, you already have this. But however, you also have to add an item where you policy to procure only new and authentic parts directly from the OCMs or authorized suppliers when those parts are available from those sources. If the components are available through the original component manufacturer or their authorized suppliers, you must purchase from them first before going to any gray market, any other distributors. Moving on to supply chain traceability, the requirement is that you have to retain records of the supply chain traceability, and that the record shall provide traceability to the OCM or aftermarket manufacturer that identifies the name and location of all of the supply chain intermediaries, all procurement lots, and date of all intermediate purchases from manufacturer to the direct source of the product for the seller. So this one is going to be a challenge one initially because it's some of the chicken and the egg. People aren't used to providing this information. You're purchasing parts, and therefore it's not available. There's a lot of components that out there that, and the supply chain traceability is that if the equipment manufacturer manufactured it on such and such a date, and then it moved to their franchise on a date, then it's sold to distributor A on another date, and then distributor B on another date, and then C ends up in your warehouse. You need to have the dates and times of when all of those trends occurred. Now, right now, that's probably going to be difficult because people aren't used to providing that information. So if this traceability is incomplete or unavailable, customer approval is required in advance of the shipment. So when you do start to quote, you'll quote and state which ones do you have traceability back to the original equipment manufacturer and which ones don't you have that data available. Now, the verification of purchased product. This section is about what that you do on the components. Now, we go through this flow chart. I just wanted to present it so you guys know that it's there. It'll tell you what the flow of the testing should look like. I've compiled as much information into this table. What I'm doing if you look over on this left-hand side, I've got your list of test methods over here, and notice they required tests. Okay, so AS 6081, if someone says they want testing per AS 6081, these are the tests that they're asking for. Included the list of tests as well as the lot size the sample size requirements. You've got sample sizes if the lot size is greater than 200. and sample size if the lot size is less than 200. To go through this, I'm not going to go through what the requirements are in each one. There are some requirements around each one of these test methods that are in the document. So documentation, packaging, and external visual general criteria. Those two are done on all devices. And what that means is if you're looking at what the packaging looks like, the boxes, the barcodes, you're comparing the pallets to what's listed on the containers. You're looking at any labels on the ESD or the MSL bags. You're also usually in that case you're pulling your samples for the 122 devices for the external visual. This visual inspection is with a naked eye, not with magnification and not with doing any imaging of the devices. It does I don't know if there are best practices. I don't know if it's a requirement or not, but best practices, people will take pictures of the external box and the packaging. So when you get to the external visual detailed criteria, this section is this will be under a microscope. The sample size is 122 devices, and it specifies clearly what criteria that you're looking for in those devices. What cues you're looking for that they may be counterfeit. The remarking and resurfacing tests, which are the tests that are determining whether or not the marking can easily be removed, or if the surface can easily be removed, which would lead you to believe that it's been blacktopped and remarked. Radiography, looking at the X-ray of the devices, it requires 45 devices. You're mainly looking to see that there's consistency of the dye from package to package, and then looking also at the wire bonds quality, things like that. Lead finish analysis, which is usually done with XRF. Here is for 3 devices, and then D-lid physical analysis, where you're actually opening up the package, looking at the dye and taking images and comparing them. One thing I want to note is these 3, remarking, resurfacing, XRF, and D-lid, are all destructive tests, and you can use the same 3 devices for all of those 3 tests. There's also some additional tests that are referenced in the standard. These are not required, although there's information on them if you want to do additional tests. And this is going to be based purely on your customer, if your customer calls out additional testing requirements. A couple things I want to note about a couple requirements is the homogeneous lot. The key point, a standard lot is a homogeneous lot that is received in a given shipment, ending receiving inspection, and all devices have the same lot or date code. So if you get multiple date codes in the part received at the same time, you must handle those as 2 separate lots. Future shipment of devices of the same date code shall be considered a new lot. So get additional pieces of the same device. Even if they're the same date code, they should be handled as a separate lot. So you should not commingle the components, even if the date code is the same. And the note here, same samples can be used for multiple test steps. That's what I had just mentioned about the destructive testing. You can use the same component. There are the same 3 components for those destructive tests. Now I want to move into ARP 6178. This is recommended practice. The target audience is the distributor of electronic components and the customers of the distributor for assessment and calculation of a risk score. The purpose of this document is a tool for evaluation of a distributor's processes for the Counterfeit Mitigation Program. This is to develop a risk assessment score, and it is not intended to be used for certification. So there's no intention for this document to be used for certification, and there's no intention of this document to be in place of AS 5553 or 6081. The status is this document was published in 2011, and it's got a worksheet, so it is an Excel spreadsheet. They'll actually, when you complete the survey, a rating survey, it'll tabulate a score. So this is the outline for the document. It includes a section on justifying your assessment, the visit assessment, what you're, the that you're actually doing, and eventually when you're done forming the survey, gives you a tabulated score. One thing that's nice about this document is it's flexible in that it has the criteria listed there and then the Excel spreadsheet, and you can weight the criteria. So things that you think are most important, you can put a higher weighting on, and that will change what your score would be. But it's an excellent tool to assess your distributors. I'm not going to cover this. This is just a list of these are the sections of the the sections of the survey. So it covers everything from, what kind of quality systems they have in place, what industry memberships are they involved in, what kind of training program do they have, do they have ESD and MSL capabilities. So, and eventually it covers also additional test and inspection, whether or not they're doing it in-house, what portion of in-house of the thing is done in-house, and if they're using a third party, who that is, and information about that test lab as well. So it's intended to be used by organizations that procure electronic components. It's an excellent tool to assess suppliers' capability to prevent, detect, contain, and report suspect or firm counterfeit electronic parts, and it's not intended to replace the certification compliance standard criteria. So it's really an excellent tool to use to assess distributors. So now I would like to turn over to them for any questions.
And I thought I would share a comment that Aaron entered into Q&A, and he was saying that from what I understand, DFARS final audits are in process, costs were accepted, and are under review.
Mm-hmm.
And so just a comment from Aaron. And Dennis is asking, what is ANAB?
So ANAB is the American, I can't remember what the N stands for, accreditation body. It's an accreditation body. If you're looking for certification, it's the body that organization that certifies the registrars and the certification bodies. So it has the oversight authority over the certification bodies when they're granting their certifications.
Okay. Let me. It looks like we do have a raised hand. Let me open up the phone line for Jerry.
Yes,
Jerry,
and with respect to 681 and demarking and resurfacing, is there a non-destructive test method that you think of or can recommend?
People, because you're putting a chemical on the surface, I believe all of them are considered destructive, because in term you don't know what impact of that chemical is going to be. So since most of the target audience for a lot of these are very high reliability applications, so for the most part, any chemicals they put on the surface, they're going to deem that part to be a destructive test, and they don't want to use that part in the field.
Okay, thank you.
And Aaron made another comment. He's saying that XRF is not destructive. He heard that grouped in with some other destructive tests and just...
I'm sorry. Yes, I know that it's not destructive. Oh, XR. Well, it's not destructive.
And just before we move on to your final presentation, Janet is saying that she was told by SAE that both AS6081 and AS5553 were not intended to be certifiable. Is that no longer true?
Initially, when AS5553 was issued, it was not intended to be a certification document. With the review of version A that was recently issued, that they've changed their course. They're really looking to have that as a certification document. Now, AS6081, from the first day of the G19D committee, that was always intended for certification.
Okay. In the interest of time, I think we'll go ahead and move on to your next segment.
Okay. The next one is on AS71. Standard is not published yet, so everything I've got here is based on is in draft form, so it could change. This standard is intended to be the test method standard. The target audience for this is independent testing facilities, distributors with in-house testing capability, and OEM government contractors who have in-house testing capability. The purpose is to standardize the test methods. As a lot of you know, a lot of these test methods evolved from failure analysis methods. There was no documented how to do these techniques for counterfeit detection. So the goal of this standard is to come up with some consistent practices. So the uses will be to define the test methods. It will also help support a proficiency testing program that you could put in place, and it is intended to be used for ISO 17025 accreditation. Now, those of you that aren't familiar, ISO IEC 17025 is a quality management system requirements document for laboratories. So it's kind of like, ISO 9001 is for manufacturing and AS 9100 is for aerospace. This one, ISO IEC 17025 is for testing laboratories or calibration laboratories. The status of this is that some drafts have, it's in draft, some portions have already been balloted, and the expected issue is first quarter of 2014. This is the outline of it. One thing I want to highlight is this is a risk-based standard, meaning that you will be calculating. You're supposed to be performing the testing based on the risks of the part. So those first couple sections on the testing requirements and the minimum risk test level, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on that, but it really is the first step is you must assess the risk of the part. It includes a counterfeit detection flow. Based on that risk, it's going to say these are the tests that need to be performed. It will also include the sampling plan, the requirements for how many units need to be tested. It requires a test plan. Now, a test plan is nothing more than a document which says these are the tests that are being requested. So it's somewhat of a contract between the test lab and the company owns the parts to say these are the tests that are going to be performed. Instructions per this document is the one. So it's going to sign off, and then the test lab goes off and does the testing. There's a section on analysis and interpretation of results, a section on the test report, trying to get a little more consistencies from lab to lab on what the test reports look like, requirements around training and certification of the individuals who are performing the tests, and also requirements around data recording, reporting, and retention. Now, the section 4 is all of the methods that are going to be included in this standard. So we have external visual inspection, SM inspection with remarking and resurfacing, X-fluorescence, radiological X-ray, and I apologize, I have that listed twice on the bullets. DCAP analysis, acoustic microscopy, electro testing, and then a few miscellaneous tests. It will include requirements for the laboratory certification requirements, as well as material control, how you handle the material, and reporting. Now, I talked a little bit in the beginning of the program about the number of people that are involved in this G19 committee. The G19A committee is by far the largest in terms of the number of people. There's a subcommittee for each one of these test methods, including, there's a miscellaneous test method group. That group is covering, at this point, 3 or 4 different methods. So if any given week, if there's the one meeting and when they're occurring and the number of people that are participating, this is a pretty broad, large effort with a lot of groups and a lot of people involved in it. I'll highlight there is one committee too that's looking at not one of the test methods, but at the risk criteria and developing that model, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So each of these test methods is going to include the processes and a description of the procedures, the apparatus, and the equipment needed, what qualification or certification of the personnel and also of your processes that you would need, and general guidelines and requirements for reporting. I'll use an example of like external visual inspection for just to give a good example on reporting. Is that you'll see some labs will produce test reports that have 2 or 3 images. Other labs, well, a good lab usually is going to be looking at taking anywhere from 20 to 30 images of the components, and probably 8 to 10 of them will end up in the test report. I've seen some that only have two images of the component. So there's a huge difference from lab and what you're getting. So the goal of this is that you would say, if I want AS 6171, I'm going to get roughly the same looking report from all of the different laboratories that would be producing that, because there's requirements. For example, in external visual inspection, there's specific requirements that you must include, top, bottom, side, 45-degree angle, etc., so that you're looking at all images. You should see the same images from each of the test labs. Just to mention that the relationship between AS 6081 and 6171. 6081 currently includes testing requirements for the parts, so it has the required tests that I covered in the previous section. When 6171 is issued, the testing requirements of AS 6081 will be removed from that document, and AS 6081 is going to refer to AS 6171. So right now, 6081 contains some testing requirements in it, but once 6171 is issued, and there's got to be a time lag from the time it's issued to the time people are getting certified to it. At some point in time, AS 6081 will no longer have testing requirements and will point over to 6171. So this is to standardize the practices of these test methods. The level of testing is risk-based, and I'll cover that in the next slide. The goal of this, not the goal, but the standard is hoped to be used for ISO 17025 accreditation. And right now, we're working on a proficiency scheme program to support the training of labs to make sure that the labs are all consistent way they do the testing. That hasn't been fully developed, but it's being worked on, and hopefully it'll come out with this standard. There'll be some support on the proficiency testing. So just to talk a little bit about the evaluation of this being a risk-based standard, the standard listed, the section on the assessment is you're looking at a couple of things. One is the risk of the part. A gentleman had asked a question about, is there anything out there that says this part is riskier than another one? So look at it in those terms. You're going to assign some kind of probability of what's the probability that part is counted. Then you look at the risk of the supplier. Does this supplier have a counterfeit mitigation program in place? Is this supplier AS 6081 that they've already done some level of testing? Is this a new supplier that you've never worked with? So they'll go into your rating of the supplier. Then you're going to look at the risk of the application. So what's the use of this component? Where is it ending up? Would a failure cause a catastrophic event? Or is this if there are duplicate components into the system that one component not cause a catastrophic event? So look into all those aspects of it. Any other identified risks would all go into this recommended tier of risk. So we do that, and you get these numbers in, and this is actually a numerical calculation that's made. You're going to come up with your risk, your component risk, your product supply risk, and any other adjustment factors you want to put into the model. You're going to put an total adjusted risk. Based upon that, it will determine whether your risk is very low or up to critical. And then that determine which test methods and the sample sizes that you need to use for those test methods. So, when we talk about the risk-based standard, that's because you're putting in the risk model that states this is what my risk is, and we'll say, for example, it's high. So because it's high, I have to do the following tests at the following sample sizes. All right, so that wraps up my discussion on 6171. So now we're going to open it up to any questions.
And by the way, before we get to the questions, I just want to make mention that, if you need to leave because we've reached the 1 hour mark, we will be sending out an email with the link to the recording. So you could visit that recording and fast forward to the end to hear anything that you may need to miss. We certainly understand if you need to run. But in the meantime, Ann, we'll continue on for a few more minutes. And I wanted to ask, can a company be certified to both AS 6081 and to AS 6171 at the same time?
Yes, they can. If a distributor has an in-house testing capability, they could be certified to AS 6081, and then their test lab can be accredited to ISO 17025 using the test methods in AS 6071. So they could do it, but they'd have to use two different assessment bodies. One would come in and do the 6081, and the other one would come do ISO 17025 requirements to the 6171 test methods.
Okay. Donna is asking, would you recommend using ARP 6178 as a survey to be sent to suppliers that you'd purchase material from?
Yes, that's it's an excellent tool for to assess anyone who's selling electronic components. It's going to cover everything from the facilities they have in place. It asks questions about ESG, ask questions about their approved supplier list. So it covers all the key points that you'd want covered in an audit of a distributor.
Okay, thank you. Let me go ahead and go to the phones and ask Jerry. Jerry, go ahead. We have your line open.
Sorry for monopolizing the questions. I did not see listed in the test methods anything with respect to optical inspection.
That would be, that's
all.
Inspection is external visual inspection detailed. So that's what we are calling it. If I can you guys see the screen that I'm flipping back into? So the first one, external visual inspection, that's going to include all the optical microscopy.
And things like, have you heard of DTEC and the HAWK system? The quantitative surface analysis of the...
No, that would be in miscellaneous testing.
All right, thank you.
I have a question from Janet. She says, if you receive an order from your customer which calls out 6081 and you have the equipment in-house to do the testing, can you do it yourself, or will you have to farm it out to an AS 6171 certified lab?
First off, because there are no AS 6171 certified labs, you wouldn't need to farm it out. I mean, that's not an option. Whether you do it in-house or farm it out is entirely up to you, and if your customer accepts that. I know there's some OEMs that require that the parts must go to an independent test lab for testing. There's other OEMs that prefer that the distributors do all the testing in-house. So it runs the gamut. It goes both ways. And really, to answer that question, you've got to go to your customer. But there's nothing in this standard that says that there's any of the standards that says that the distributors can't do testing in-house.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to bring the question portion of our program to a close. If you have a question, or if your question that you've already entered has gone answered, please use that Q&A box. We'll leave it open for a few minutes after the program is over to gather up questions. Ann has agreed to reply to those in document form, and we can get the answers back to you. So we don't want to leave any question unanswered. And Ann, before we do close things out, any closing comments overall? Any final thoughts?
No, other than, I'm pleased with the number of folks that attended. And hopefully this provided the information that you're looking for. And SAE.org is a very excellent resource for you to go find out more information about the standards. Thank you for your participation.
Okay, and by the way, in case you're not already aware, SAE has a special portal dedicated to articles, blog posts, events, training, publications, regulations, and of course the standards we discussed today and other related standards. You can visit counterfeitparts.sae.org. And